So we'd love to hear your questions, but I just wanted to start. Madeleine, you have said, I quote, "The fragment is a really important structure for telling stories that have been heavily impacted by colonialism. For so long, value has been placed on a story that you can tell from beginning to end. For many marginalized folks, this is impossible due to trauma or lost history," which I think is just such a beautiful quote, and it's something that I think applies to contemporary times as much as the past. But to your film, which is what we're here to talk about, I wanted to ask you about this concept of the fragmentary and how that applies to your film and how you approach the subject, given it probably exists in historiography, as you say, more in a fragmentary form.
Well, thank you. Zita and I, there's something Zita said to me during rehearsal that I always think about in terms of this idea of the fragment, but a lot of our rehearsal process would happen, while Zita had a newborn. And so, and I think you were still like nursing and maybe I was done, but it was very much, the baby would be a part of the rehearsal, yours, mine, in some way. And at one point you're like, oh, I see. You really, with this film, you really need the fragment to be enough. Because, quite literally sometimes it feels that way when you're balancing things as a mother and a maker, that might be all you will be able to do for some time are fragments. But there's another part of it too that I think is quite interesting, and the politics of it sort of revealed itself to me, not just in the making, but like after the film was made, which is that after really late in the edit, I read for the first time this book called The Tale of Genji, which is it's the first known novel, and it's written in feudal Japan by a Japanese woman. It's an epic. And this book, The Tale of Genji, what's very interesting about it is the last chapter of the book is actually written 100 years after the original author died, and it's written by a different woman. And something else that's very interesting about this book is that the last sentence of The Tale of Genji is not a complete sentence. It actually ends like in the middle of a thought. And in the edit, it was this very important moment because I just had like separately been reading, but I came back to the edit and I said, you know what, this scene at the end of the film, because that scene we'd kind of like had happened sort of like the last day of shooting, and there was more lines. I was like, it actually ends here. It ends like, before, like, just cut here. This is the end of the film. And what I was thinking was like, what happens in this book, The Tale of Genji, is what we've done too, which is that the burden of completion is not on the individual. And it's not on any one moment in time, but that actually that the work can be an invitation for other people to continue the work. And what a great sort of act of faith to trust that, the work will continue in some form, or like the things that you're, dreaming will like have some manifestation that you're not totally responsible for. And so that I think is what we were doing for Suzanne. And, I think the work gesture is a gesture of that, towards future audiences as well.
I love that. I love that the process itself is sort of part of the content, if you will. And I think that speaks to your broader body of work, which is investigating the lives, particularly of Black women, historically in the present and so on. So I was wondering, in terms of making a film with Suzanne Césaire's name in the title, sort of can lead to expectations that it might be somewhat biographical. I mean, how did you come to Suzanne's writings? How did you conceive of this film? Did you want it to be biographical, or is most of what's being said coming out of her mouth her text that she has written?
So Suzanne Césaire wrote 7 very important essays. She ran a journal called Tropiques with her husband during World War II. And these essays in this journal continue to be very important. but she never published after World War II. And her husband is like immensely known in France, but she is not very well known. And there's not any kind of like linear way to know about her. I mean, now increasingly there are ways, and there's a growing sort of body of people discussing her, talking about her, publishing about her. But for a very long time, there was really nothing. And so to sort of try to retrace the steps of Suzanne Césaire are at this point, much of it's lost to time. I mean, as a part of this process, we sat down with basically everyone alive who knew her. Her kids are now in their 70s. So we spent time with everyone who knew her in her life. But even for them, she died quite young. A lot is lost. For me, I think, rather than try to sort of blanket over what is lost, I'm interested in, the sort of the missing, the gaps as a form. And I think, my intention with the cast that we had was not to try to create some like simulation of the past, which I think most biography films try to do. And I think they really, as a genre, it's a kind of impoverished genre because that is sort of like the main fixation. And I was more interested in finding people who would be ideal collaborators and people to talk about Suzanne Césaire and talk about her writing with, and sort of like, yes, we want to see the past, we want to imagine the past, but like also really the work we're doing is about the present, which is kind of all we ever have. And so, with the cast, it was about finding people who could be really interesting allies in that work and in that conversation.
So moving to our wonderful cast here, I can't believe we have Suzanne Césaire and André Breton on the stage. Only at New York Film Festival. Zita, coming from France, I wanted to ask about, did you know anything about Suzanne Césaire before collaborating on this film? And also, from what I can tell, there is no video or film a depiction of her anywhere. I mean, what did you bring to the role? Because there was, like, in terms of gesture, clothing, voice, etc.
No, I didn't know Suzanne Césaire. I knew Aimé Césaire because he's really famous. And so it was like shocking, to don't know anything about Suzanne Césaire. For me, I was okay, I missed something. And so to try to get into the movie and try to approach Suzanne Césaire, it was really interesting, the process that we've been through, Madeleine and I, because we were working on fragments. And so we had to be like, okay with that there is a lot of missing part. And we were a bit like kind of detective, to try to find the truth, or maybe several truths. And it was what I love about that, because there is no one good answer, but there is several answer and several, like, not answer, but maybe questions, And so with Suzanne Césaire, I think I was delicate with her, I wanted to be like respectful with her and what she wanted to leave behind her. And so I didn't want to force to be like aggressive or something like this, and to be okay that there is like some blanks and it's okay. And the thing what I love too, it was acting an actress who's gonna play this role. And so it was okay to I didn't have this pressure, like I have to be perfect and to make an imitation of Suzanne Césaire. But as you said, it was like about present and what we bring to Suzanne, to Aimé Breton, to Madeleine film. and try to find the echo in us, like, okay, what I want to say about her in Madeleine movie. Like I'm a woman, a French woman, a black woman. My mom come from Jamaica, my dad from France, and what is the link, between Suzanne and I? And she was a mom, she was an intellectual, she was a poet, and so, I was a new mom, and to understand the time you give to your children and the time you give to your work, and so try to find the balance and try to. No, it was really deep, and that's it.
And Josué, playing a very dapper André Breton. I also want to ask how you and Madeleine, all of you, I guess, work together to sort of situate his presence, because he's certainly not dominating in the story or this film. And also, I think there's not a lot of sort of video or evidence of how he was, but I think it's immaterial for this film anyway. But can you talk a little about your role as André Breton and what you wanted to bring to it?
Well, I think originally, it was quite obvious that I would play André Breton, a Puerto Rican. But I think during the discussions between Madeleine and I, the thing that stood out to me the most is his curiosity and his attraction to both of these characters in it, and how his experience when he went to Martinique and spent time with Suzanne and Aimé, how that touched him and changed him. I think focusing on that was the biggest thing and help for me as a performer. I tried to read some of André's surrealist writings, and it was a little difficult. Honestly, but in it, I found that, and there's a couple scenes in the film where you see them blindfolded, and they would play these games to really detach themselves from being, or to get them to be more present. And I think that's what we spend a lot of time doing, and just seeing how the stories of these people find us. There's a scene in the film, and I hope you don't mind if I wanted to mention this to you yesterday. There's a scene in the film which I think is really beautiful, and it really stood out to me, that was much different than what I read for and studied for, translated for. But the young lady who picks up the script and starts to read it, that's a really beautiful moment, which was not that way in the original. And I just want to thank you for doing that, because it just encapsulates what her story is about. Here's a woman that necessarily didn't want her story to be told, maybe didn't want to be founded by time, but stories find a way to touch us all. And that scene in particular is just really touching, how she finds it, and you can see the girl light up. I was supposed to say some of those lines, but it just would not have worked the same way. And I think that's just such an important thing about stories and how they find us, and the energy, and how that continues to tell us and affects us all.
Yeah, just, that's so funny. Because... Yeah, sometimes you're like, I was saying this during one of our Q&As to Motel, is like, there's you're always trying to protect the actors. And it's especially because we shoot on film. So a lot of times we'll be the camera team will be like, yeah, so just so you know, we've only got one more take of this. And then you go to the actor and you're like, take your time. No, it's, there's a whole backup show thing happening. But yeah, no, that scene with Reese, wonderful actress, Reese Antoinette, what was really amazing about that was, it wasn't planned that way. So we had this idea, well, let's try this monologue a few ways. And let's try it with this idea of this PA who's on set, and who becomes a part of the storytelling. And we go to film with her, and all of a sudden there's this huge thunder and lightning storm. And I mean, we're not a union set, but we still try to keep everyone safe, and we like follow the norms of union. And if you see, like, if you have lightning and thunder, you have to essentially stop. Like, you can't just have people out in the open air in the middle of a lightning storm. And so that was the moment where we were like, okay, we literally have one take because we're going to have to stop. And so all of that was real. And and she was kind of like, okay, what do I do? And I was like, okay, just use it. Like, when you hear it, react to it, like, and it ended up being, I mean, literally the monologue is like, here the land always talked back. Like, it's like literally about storms. And so it was just this moment of, there's always a little bit of magic in the making. There's the stuff that you plan and you plan and you plan, and then some of it's just like, in the ether.
It's a beautiful scene. I always love the sound of thunder and storms in cinema. Please raise your hand if you have questions. Do we have a mic, or we just yelling? We do have a mic. Look, just here. Sorry, the mic's coming.
Congratulations. I think the whole film feels like a long poet. My question is whether the director or anybody of the cast is from Martinique, because I feel like there's a very strong connection with that world. So I don't know whether it's really the understanding because somebody grew up there, or whether it's just a connection they found.
I would say a good majority of people who worked on the film are from the Caribbean. My politic around the way I think about the Caribbean is there's this writer, Kamel Braithwaite, who describes the Caribbean as a mountain range separated by water. And one thing that the politics of this film is a post-colonial politic. And part of that for me is this idea that actually people in the Global South, people in the Caribbean have really a shared political interest, a shared sort of reality in terms of the ways that folks in the Global South are exposed to global warming. But they're very separated by essentially the territories and the territorial legacy of colonialism by, people will literally be 15 miles away on a different island, but speak different languages. It's very hard to get flights in between islands. You have to usually go to the States or go to Canada, or it's easier to go to France from Martinique than to go to New York. So for me, the politic of the Caribbean is always about actually these people are cousins and these people share an interest, and the conversation about the Caribbean should be one that has space for that politic. So no, I'm not from Martinique. My parents are artists. My mother is a writer. And so I approached the work from the perspective of being the daughter of an artist and being an artist and a mother myself. And when I spent time with the Césaire children, that was the first thing I did, very much I came to them with that. I said, listen, my parents are artists. My mother was a writer, and I understand some of what that experience was for you. And I think that they, we had a very honest, direct time that we spent together as a result of that. There is a writer on the film, Marina Magloire, who is from Martinique, a writer and historian that also worked with me. And yeah.
Yes, down the front. The mic will come down, just down here.
Congratulations. I thought your film was unapologetically ruminative in a way that was really beautiful. And I thought that it was poetic in the way that you incorporated the fragments and the acting, and just really bravo. My question, I actually have many, but I'm going to focus on one. At the beginning of the film, there's this really interesting use of sound where we have the sound of kind of a crackling, almost record player in the background. And it's before the drums kick in and we have the dancing scene. I was curious, what is that sound? Like, what were you recording there? Because it had such texture and it really invited me into a new world, but I wasn't sure what it was.
So I don't think I've gotten to talk about this at any Q&A yet. So the musical tension for me in the film like one of the things I asked her family was, I said, well, what kind of music did they listen to? Because there's a very well-known kind of music from that era in Martinique called Béguine, and it's like very clarinet driven. It's very specific music. So I was like, oh, were they listening to Béguine? And they were like, no, you know, I mean, you have to understand like Aimé Césaire and Suzanne Césaire and, you know, all these writers, they like Aimé Césaire went to like the Sorbonne, like these are like essentially the talent, like this is Harvard, you know, these are like the top, you know, there's like at that time there was one school in Martinique, and then to go to that one school and then to get to go to college in France, you are like the smartest kid on your island. And they were very much a part of an intellectual, global community. And so they listened to Duke Ellington. They listened to jazz and like popular African-American music. And their kids were very clear about that. They're like, they listen to jazz. So I was thinking a bit about, you know, and there's all these pictures of them at these like beautiful kind of diplomat parties. And I was thinking about what that space was like, that kind of colonial space, which was like the big band, pop music. But then there's also, you know, the drumming. Drums are such a central part of in Francophone Caribbean music, like in Haiti and also in Martinique. There's wonderful recordings of dance and drumming by Catherine Dunham. She did field studies and recorded field studies in Martinique. So we actually used those with the dancers. We had a choreographer on set who trained with Catherine Dunham. And she was like, you know, really, she was there sort of with the dancers with us. And those, I think they were doing a fertility dance. And actually even like the scarf around the female dancer's waist was like really from archive that Catherine Dunham had recorded. But I wanted to create this tension between like the music of like the after, like the music in the woods, and the music of like, you know, the spot where the Vichy soldier would have been and where Andre Breton would have been, and that there's this kind of like dual soundtrack of the space and the time. One more thing, so you asked about the sound. In that sequence, there's drumming. We had drummers on set who like did this beautiful sequence with us. But in the sound design, we were really feeling like, okay, there's something missing. And the whole film, I think, is very much, for me, it's about desire. It's about women's desire, specifically like straight, cis Black women's desire. So this dance is drums, but, you know, like in the sound design, we decided to kind of open it up and add an earthquake. And it's like, you know, something about like the space between the dancers and like this narrative of like nature and catastrophe was like, okay, like the dance opens up to an earthquake. And yeah. So thank you for your question.
Yes, yeah. I think the mic will come over to you on the other side here. Okay. Did everyone here, just asking where was it shot and where is it screened?
We shot at a palm tree archive in South Florida. It was a one location film. And that was, I think, really lovely for all of us because in between filming, we were in this like incredible sort of garden. It was 100 acres. So it was also sometimes, from a production perspective, quite difficult. We had like golf carts, and we were shooting we limited ourselves to dolly. So, I mean, really shout out to our grip team, to our lead grip, Kiev, because it was really hard work. We had dolly in like swamp, and it, you know, it was, I mean, I think it really paid off, but it was challenging. No, yeah, I mean, that's a very crazy thing that I think foregrounds all of this is that in Martinique, there's a volcano, and just before Suzanne Césaire was born, the volcano erupted and it killed 30,000 people. Like there's this historic city in Martinique where basically everyone but I think one or two people died. And I just think about what that psychologically must mean to live in that kind of, with that awareness of how temporary modernity really is, where you're like supposed to participate in these like modern structures and like the priorities of it, but to also be aware that like at any time, like a volcano could erupt and it could like just mean nothing. And I for me, that was where I sort of found empowerment in Suzanne Césaire's choice to not sort of publish sort of endlessly or focus on a kind of prolific production. One of the ways I think of it in a kind of powerful refusal framework is to think of it as her understanding that actually it's all a kind of temporary, very fragile idea that anything can kind of last forever, and that maybe the political priorities of the work we do is maybe different than some kind of aspiration of this kind of like imperialist perspective on like why you make work or how we remember. So like I think of it as like, yeah, she was like always talking about this destruction, and she sort of understood it for herself and for her work too.
Yeah, thank you so much for your questions. Please thank our film team, Madeleine, Zita, and Heather.